I call to order the meeting. We're dealing with the Budget Implementation Act, Bill C-74, which was referred yesterday to committee. We have with us today a number of Finance Canada officials and official from Department of Veterans Affairs. They'll be making short presentations on Part 1, 4, and 2 of the bill, and then we'll go into questioning. If time allows, we may move on to Parts 3 and 5 of the bill. If not, we'll be dealing with these sections plus Part 6 at our meeting tomorrow. I trust the committee is satisfied with that approach. Seeing no objections, so we'll start with Part 4. We have Madam Norrie, Acting Senior Director at the Policy Directorate of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Ms. Norrie, the floor is yours on Part 4, the Canadian Forces Members and Veterans.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for having me today. So this bill contains updates to the Veterans Wellbeing Act and other associated acts and delivers on a pension for life option with benefits and services designed to help veterans live a full and productive life after service. Proposed Pension for Life addresses the concerns that military and veteran communities and families have raised with the department. It's expected to come into effect on April 1st, 2019. The Pension for Life is a combination of benefits that provides recognition, income support, and better overall stability. It will provide a holistic package that reintroduces lifelong monthly pain and suffering payments, implements a new recognition benefit, and consolidates 6 of 7 existing income-related financial benefits. These benefits will give Canadian Armed Forces members and veterans a choice about the form of compensation that works best for them and their families. Pension for Life plan has 3 key pillars: recognizing service-related pain and suffering, delivering further recognition for those with severe and permanent impairments, and delivering income support when veterans need it. Every veteran is different. With these changes, the Veterans Wellbeing Act is even more flexible so that support can be tailored to each veteran's situation and service history. The Pension for Life benefits in this bill include 3 new benefits. They are the pain and suffering compensation. It's a monthly, lifelong, tax-free payment that recognizes pain and suffering experienced by veterans and Canadian Armed Forces members with a disability due to a service-related illness and or injury. The additional pain and suffering compensation is a new monthly tax-free payment for veterans experiencing barriers to reestablishment after service because of their severe and permanent illness and or injury. And finally, the third benefit, the income replacement benefit. This monthly benefit is designed to provide income support to veterans who are experiencing barriers to reestablishment, primarily resulting from service. And the benefit is available to veterans, survivors, and orphans for life should they need it. Happy to take any questions.
Just open the floor to what's being asked. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to Part 4, amendments to the Income Tax Act and to related legislation. I see Trevor McGowan.
As mentioned, Part 1 of the bill relates to the income tax. I'll go through each of the measures in the order in which they first appear in the bill, although some of the measures can affect a number of clauses and do not appear sequentially. The first measure relates to the Pension for Life program. It was previously announced. As noted, the pain and suffering and additional pain and suffering benefits would be tax-free. This ensures the appropriate tax treatment, and it also ensures the appropriate tax treatment of the income replacement benefit. It also ensures that the Memorial Grant for First Responders is tax-free. This grant starts in 2018-2019 and will support families of first responders, such as police officers, firefighters, and paramedics who have fallen in the line of duty. It also implements measures reducing the small business tax rate, first to 10.5%, or from 10.5% to 10%, effective January 1, 2018, and to 9% effective January 1, 2019. It also contains amendments relating to the holding of passive investments within a private corporation, the first of which limits the ability of Canadian-controlled private corporations to access the small business deduction where they have significant amounts of passive income within the corporation. And the second measure provides that corporations will no longer be able to obtain refunds of taxes paid on investment income while paying dividends eligible for the enhanced dividend tax credit, which are presumed to have come out of active business income. It also contains a measure relating to income sprinkling, which prevents the ability of higher income individuals to lower their personal taxes by diverting income to lower income family members. The measure, another measure enhances the, or provides additional tax relief for Canadian Armed Forces measures. Currently, deduction or an exemption is available based upon the risk score for certain designated international operational missions. This would extend it so the benefit is available regardless of the particular risk score assigned to a mission, and it would increase the level of exempt pay up to the level of a lieutenant colonel. The bill would introduce the Canada Workers Benefit, a refundable tax credit that supplements the earnings of lower income workers to replace the former working income tax benefit. It would also expand the list of eligible expenses for the medical expense tax credit purposes to include costs associated with service animals for persons with severe mental impairments. A good example of that would be service dogs for individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder. It accelerates the indexation of the Canada Child Benefit by 2 years, so that indexation begins in July of 2018. It extends by 1 year the mineral exploration tax credit, which is a 15% tax credit designed to promote the exploration for mineral resources in Canada and to help companies engaged in that activity raise money. It also extends to the end of 2013 a temporary measure that 2023, a temporary measure that permits a qualifying family member, so a parent, spouse, or common law partner, to become a plan holder of a registered disability savings plan for an adult beneficiary whose capacity to enter into a contract is in doubt. It has a couple measures relating to charities. The first relates to the qualification as municipalities as eligible donees for the purpose of reducing a charity whose registration has been revoked, exposure to the 100% revocation tax. And so in qualifying circumstances, if the donation's been approved, charity that's had its charitable status revoked would be able to make a donation to a municipality and avoid the 100% revocation tax. It also eliminates duplication in the procedure for a university outside Canada to become a qualified donee for charitable tax donation purposes. Currently, it's required that the university outside Canada become a prescribed university and also be registered with the Canada Revenue Agency. This would eliminate the requirement that it be prescribed, so that it would just be required to be registered with the CRA. It would provide legislative authority for the government to share data relating to the Canada Child Benefit with provinces solely for the purpose of administering their social assistance payment regimes. And it would retroactively change the previous system of child benefits, being the Canada Child Tax Benefit, the National Child Benefit Supplement, and the Universal Child Care Benefit, so that individuals who are Indians under the Indian Act and who legally reside in Canada, and have Canadian-born children are eligible for those benefits as of 2005, to bring it in line with their eligibility for the new Canada Child Benefit. Lastly, it would extend eligibility for Class 43.2. That's a class of assets that's eligible for capital cost allowance or tax depreciation, and provides an accelerated 50% capital cost allowance rate for certain clean energy generation and conservation equipment, and that would be extended to be available in respect of property acquired before 2025. And that's it. Those are the measures contained in Part 1 of the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGowan. Now invite Gervais Coulombe et Pierre Merci to pronounce upon Part 2, amendments to the Excise Act 2001, tobacco taxation, and to related legislation.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you.
All tobacco products sold in the Canadian market. The tobacco excise duty rates are currently set to automatically increase every 5 years to account for inflation. Under this approach, tobacco excise duty rates would be adjusted on December 1st, 2019. Budget 2018 proposed to advance the existing inflationary adjustments for tobacco excise duty rates to occur on an annual basis rather than every 5 years. To ensure consistency in the excise framework, inflationary adjustments will take effect on April 1st of every year, starting in 2019. Effective February 28, 2018, the day after the budget, tobacco excise duty rates were adjusted to account for inflation since the last inflationary adjustment that was took in 2014. That first adjustment equivalated to an increase of about $1.29 per carton of 200 cigarettes. The budget also proposed to increase the excise duty rate by an additional $1 per carton of 200 cigarettes, along with corresponding increases to the excise duty rates on other tobacco products like chewing tobacco or cigars. Overall, as of February 28, 2018, the excise duty rate on 200 cigarettes increased by $2.29, rising from $21.56 per cartoon to $23.85 per cartoon. That translates into an increase of about 29 cents per pack of 25 cigarettes. An inventory tax also applied to inventories of more than 30,000 cigarettes, which is equivalent to 150 cartons of 200 cigarettes, held by manufacturers, importers, wholesalers, and retailers as of the end of February 27, 2018. This measure generally applies as of the day after the budget, and details of the measure were found on pages 39 and 40 of the Budget Supplementary Information booklet. And the clauses basically implementing these measures are all the clauses under Part 2, covering clauses 47 to 67 of Bill C-74. This completes the introductory remarks for Part 2. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much to all the witnesses for their presentations. We're now going to move into questioning. Mr. Fergus has requested that we just have make it open season for the chair to take down the names of members who raise their hands, and we can go with. What do you suggest? 2 or 3 minutes per?
Yeah, I think so. That'd be great. Very good, Mr. Chair. At your discretion.
Okay, 3. Is that okay? Okay. Appreciate your yes. Go ahead.
Juste pour que je comprenne bien, Monsieur le Président.
Just so I understand correctly, I think each of us have several questions to ask. So are you going to time us at 2 or 3 minutes, or would you prefer that we get into an issue and carry on until we're satisfied? Well, until you're satisfied could be endless, so I think there has to be some limit. But if there isn't consent, we can go back to the regular way of proceeding.
The free-for-all approach works quite well. If other people want to get in and you feel that we're running low on time, you could just ask the member to wrap up and then let someone else in. But usually we're a pretty good bunch.
Is the government side happy with this approach?
Yes, indeed.
We'll make sure you have a chance to ask your questions. There won't.
C'est juste
it's just to be sure, because we are discussing pretty technical issues at times, and so in order to get to the end. Well, just to give me an idea so I can adjust the limits. Well, if it might take less than 2 or 3 minutes sometimes, but sometimes it might be 4, 5, or 6 minutes. I don't know, but I think if we do it, if we can be more flexible, yes, absolutely. If the member is satisfied, we can then proceed.
J'aimerais juste ajouter un petit mot à dire.
I would just like to add a comment to this. Usually we agree, and it works quite well to proceed in this way. But if we feel it's taking too much time for a person to ask a question, we'll ask you to give the floor to someone else, and we'll come back to you. Usually within a 2-hour period, we have enough time to have the discussions we wish to have.
Time to get through. And,
Tigidou.
all right.
Merci.
We'll start with the government member to begin with. Is there anyone who wants to begin? All right, Mr. Sabara.
Thank you, Chair. Trevor, going to the section dealing with passive income, you mentioned that. Can you broaden and just clarify the rules that will be put in place with the BIA legislation with regards to passive investments in terms of the step up between the small business tax rate and the corporate income tax rate?
Thank you for your question. So under the proposed rule, the eligibility for the small business deduction will start to be reduced once a CCPC earns $50,000 of passive investment income, and will be gradually reduced until it reaches $150,000 of passive income, at which point the eligibility for the small business deduction will be nil.
And in terms of looking at the CCPCs that will be impacted, what percentage of CCPCs may be impacted by that change?
It's about 3% of corporations are claiming the small business deduction that would be impacted by that proposed change.
Okay. Of the rough, I think it's like over 1 million CCPCs, I think I believe the number is, so it'll be a very small amount.
It's for this specific measure, yes. So it's about 3% of about 750,000 firms that are claiming the small business deduction.
Okay. Second question regarding the income sprinkling measure that Trevor you spoke about. That to me is a measure that's in the BIA legislation that is about tax fairness for Canadians, and I wanted to see if you could outline the broad strokes of how that will be implemented.
Yes, of course. Thank you for the question. I'd be happy to do so. The current measure builds upon the existing tax on split income that applies to individuals who are under the age of 18. And it applies top rate taxation for income that is considered to have been split or diverted from a higher income earner to a particular individual. And so how it would apply is if certain split income, which can be dividends from private corporations generally, certain income from a trust, passive income like interest, gets paid to an individual, and the amount is not what's called an excluded amount. Excluded amounts, there are a number of different categories. The sort of catch-all category for those who are over the age of 25, which is the broadest class of affected individuals, would be amounts that are reasonable having regard to the relative contributions of labor and capital of the individual who receives the income as compared to all their relatives who've also contributed to the business. And that formed the core of the rules that was announced in July of 2017. And then in December of 2017, a number of amendments were made, or changes were made, both simplifying and clarifying the draft legislation, and providing a number of sort of clear examples where, without having to test the reasonableness of a payment, it could be excluded from this tax on split income. So those would include, for example, where you put a significant labor contribution into the business, which would be considered to have been met if you've put in more than 20 hours a week during the portion of the year that the business is being carried on, or for non-services businesses, if you have a sufficient equity interest in the corporation carrying on the business, there would be an exclusion there. So it would apply where an individual has a relative who's involved in a business. That individual receives income from that business, and that income primarily is either, for those 25 and over, is either unreasonable or none of the other exclusions are available.
So someone that actually is contributing to the family business and family farm, someone who's involved in providing labor capital, I understand the TOSI rules would really remain unchanged.
That's correct. The idea is that for those who are making substantial and significant and real contributions to or in support of a business, of a family business, who are working in it, or who have provided financing, it's not just labor contributions, that they would be unaffected and they wouldn't be subject to the tax on split income. It's really intended to apply in situations where you have, in a classic case, a high income earner who earns monies, for example, in their law practice. I'll use that as an example because that's my background. But they earn income in their law practice and divert it through one or more corporations to, say, their adult children or somebody else who's not involved in the business, but who would be paying tax at a lower rate and be able to effect a tax savings because of that differential.
Okay. I'll stop there and have more questions after.
Mr. Kamik?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have two questions, and maybe I'll mention which one. So Section 45, Class 43.2, Schedule 2. But before I begin that one, just so you can look around for the answer, Mr. McGowan, you mentioned sharing child benefit data with provinces to administer their provincial regimes. What kind of data is going to be shared, and what problem are you looking to resolve?
Currently, the Tax Act permits sharing of information relating to the National Canada Child Benefit Supplement with provinces solely for the purposes of them being able to put in their benefit systems, which they may need that information in order to do. The issue is that with the replacement of the former system of child benefits, the National Child Benefit Supplement, Canada Child Tax Benefit, the Universal Child Care Benefit, with the Canada Child Benefit in 2016, the information relating to the National Child Benefit Supplement will no longer be available. It currently exists as a vestigial component of the Canada Child Benefit formula, although that is legislated to be removed. And so with the elimination of the National Canada Child Benefit Supplement, information relating to that program will no longer be available. Provinces would still need information relating to federal child benefits for the purpose of their programs. And so along with the shift from the NCBS to the Canada Child Benefit, the information to be provided shifting.
But so does that mean in 2016, when the government consolidated all these different programs, information was being given to provinces stopped as of 2016, and now in 2018 that's being fixed? You said it was vestigial information, so it's just the information wasn't being collected in a certain way to be passed on to the government, or just stopped being passed on?
Well, it
and what information, like what is it, first name, last name, place of residence?
it relates to previous years. So information has continued to be shared, and in the current, if you look in the 126 before, the current Canada Child Benefit calculation, when I said there was a vestigial calculation, the National Child Benefit Supplement, the variable that represents that former program, actually remains in the calculation. It's just added and then immediately taken away so that it doesn't impact the calculation of the Canada Child Benefit, but it's not operative. It doesn't really do anything anymore, and it was left there for an additional, I think, 2-year span to give provinces enough time to update their programs.
Just to add to that, just to give you a sense of the type of the reasons why a province might use or territory might use that information. You could have a family with children that's just coming on social assistance, and they might be eligible for certain transition payments. partly because, let's say, they've experienced a drop in income. It'll be a while before the child benefit system, so the Canada Child Benefit, catches up to that because it's based on the prior year income. So certain provinces have a system where they says, okay, we'll bridge some of that until your Canada Child Benefit goes up. And basically they're using the information, so on eligible children, they'll have some information on at least the last year's income, then the sort of the basic information on the family. So those are really, that would be an example of how it's used.
Mr. Julian?
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today with us. It's very important. You have a great deal of expertise, and I'd just like to mention a small comment, but it's important. We live in a bilingual country. Many officials are fully bilingual and are able to make presentations in both official languages, so even before the Finance Committee, if those officials have that ability, we would like the presentations to be made in both official languages, because we know full well that this is important for the country. I'd like to begin with my first question on the benefits for veterans, because I'd like to understand, it might be Ms. Norrie or Mr. McGowan who might be able to answer my question. When we look at the career impact allowance, if I understand correctly, that's been eliminated through this bill. But at the same time, what people are receiving are an additional pain and suffering compensation. But we're talking about $13,000 per year. And the allowance or the compensation talks about being less than $1,000 per year. So do I have the right figures in terms of that transfer? So the elimination of one and the scope of that compensation.
The additional pain and suffering compensation will be partly replacing it. So the career impact allowance recognizes the lost career progression potential of a veteran who's injured. So that aspect will be covered in the income replacement benefit. The rest of the additional pain and suffering compensation looks at recognizing and compensating for veterans experiencing barriers to reestablishment after service. And so the additional pain and suffering compensation is non-taxable, and with the maximum amount of $1,500. And so the career impact allowance amounts were taxable. And so the difference is comparable, if you will, after tax.
Mais si on parle de la...
But if we talk about the career impact allowance, that's the $13,000 and some dollars that's eliminated. So can you take us through what the other calculation is? Because it seems, just looking at the budget figures, or at least the clauses we're looking at here with this bill, that the $13,000 is being eliminated, but $1,500 is being given. So what are the other figures that would be added to that that would result in compensation that is fair for the impact on someone's career?
There's a number of benefits that are contained in the Pension for Life proposal in the bill. So there would be three different benefits that could be considered. So the income replacement benefit will replace 6 benefits. So that includes the career impact allowance, the career impact allowance supplement, the supplementary retirement benefit, the retirement income security benefit, and the earnings loss benefit, both short and long term. And it will be 90% of a veteran's pre-release salary, and it's indexed annually to the time it's paid. And so as part of the income replacement benefit, there's a recognition for lost career progression potential, which is a 1% annual increase to their pre-release salary until the age of 60 or 20 years of service for veterans with a diminished earnings capacity. So they'll be entitled to the career recognition aspect through the income replacement benefit. In addition, there's the additional pain and suffering compensation, which recognizes pain and suffering experienced by veterans and Canadian Armed Forces members with a disability due to a service-related injury or illness. It has 3 grade levels. So grade 1 is 1,500, grade 2 is 1,000, grade 3 is 500, and it's based on the extent of the impairment of the veteran. And in addition to that, there's the pain and suffering compensation, which will be replacing the disability award. And it has a maximum amount of $1,150.
Okay, I don't want to take too much time on this particular issue, but I guess what I'm asking for is for you to lead us through, since we can see in the bill what veterans are losing, lead us through what they are gaining. And that may be something that you could provide to the committee perhaps over the next few days, because I'm still not convinced reading through the elimination of the earning loss benefit and the career impact allocation, supplementary retirement benefit, retirement income security benefit, the veterans are better off. And I think for the needs of this committee, if you can lead us through perhaps in writing where veterans actually gain in terms of the overall income stream, that would be helpful, because looking through the Budget Implementation Act, there seems to be a lot of takeaways from veterans. And so I just want to be sure, I'm sure my colleagues do as well, that veterans are not getting less coming through this process rather than more. So is it possible that you could provide to the committee the financial spreadsheets and the model that allows us to see, given the takeaways, what veterans would actually be receiving?
I can provide additional information, certainly. I can also run through a scenario, if you will, that would show an example of what a veteran might receive through all the different benefits under Pension for Life, if that's helpful. We are not, so just to clarify, the bill consolidates 6 benefits under the income replacement benefit. So we're replacing 6, including the career impact allowance, with 1, and it has additional features. So as I mentioned, the lost career progression potential, it also includes increased amounts for survivors and a $20,000 allowable earnings. In addition, the additional pain and suffering compensation is non-taxable. So there's a gain there. I'm not sure if it would be helpful, but I'm happy to run you through a scenario. That would help.
I think it would be helpful to the committee if you provided the modeling that comes through the ministry, how you constructed this. Okay. And I'm sure you had a number of different scenarios. It would be helpful to have that. We do have veterans groups coming forward to committee, so having that information prior to them providing their testimony would be very helpful. Merci.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Mr. McLeod was the next to have his hand up. Then we'll go to Mr. Albus, and I did see Mr. Fergus and Madam Zerowitz. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the presenters today. I was quite pleased to see the extension of the mineral exploration tax credit in place. I think all jurisdictions that are trying to attract industry and exploration in their jurisdiction need a number of things. Of course, certainty is one of them, and whether it's through the regulatory process or through the land claims, self-government process with the Indigenous governments, industry wants to see that there's stability and their investment is going to be safe. And there's also the cost factor, and that's a big one also for us in the north, because we are in a very remote part of the country. And so we always conclude whenever we talk to industry, Chamber of Mines, Chamber of Commerce, that we'd prefer to have investment in transportation infrastructure and airports and those type of big ticket items that we need, rather than subsidies. But the subsidies to mining companies seem to help. And However, we seem to extend it just before it expires in the last while anyway. And so I'm wondering if you could explain what the advantages or the disadvantages of making the mineral exploration tax credit a permanent measure instead of a temporary measure that we seem to just get included at the last minute. I think maybe there's an impact to industry and how they move forward also. So I'm very curious to see why it's done this way.
Well, it's a bit difficult to, talk about the government's motivation over time to make the credit temporary. It has been first introduced in 2000, that the mineral exploration tax credit, and was since extended by governments since then on a temporary basis. The use of a temporary measure allows for more ongoing review of the economic conditions that the sector is facing, in particular the mining sector is very cyclical in nature, and so I can only presume that this factors in the decision to make this temporary, so it allows to review on an ongoing basis whether the credit is still needed. In terms of you raising the certainty for the industry, one thing I would note is that under the credit, the equity, like the money that has been raised in the first, and that's also under the flow-through share system, the money that has been raised in the first 3 months of a year can be spent up until the end of the following calendar year. So it does provide like a 2-year window for corporations to spend on their exploration activity.
Okay, so I'm assuming that this is tracked and we're seeing positive results, so that it gives us the comfort that we should do it again the following year and the following year. That kind of information is
yes,
captured.
Information about the economy more generally and the mining sector, the commodity prices, and so on.
Okay, my next question is about the increase in taxes on tobacco products, and I'm curious because I'm curious as to why we're raising the taxes on tobacco products, whether it's so we can generate more revenues, so we can discourage the use of tobacco. The use of tobacco is a big problem in my riding. I think we probably have the worst statistics in the country when it comes to lung cancer and the number of people that are smoking. So I'm curious, is this so we can have more revenues? If it is for generating more revenues, is the intention to put some of these revenues, to reinvest them into smoking prevention programs and into tobacco control? Is that what we're intending to do with some of the revenues that we generate?
Thank you for the question. The measure that was introduced in budget 2018, I'd say, had two major components. The first one was to ensure that inflationary adjustments are brought in every year. And in doing so, we do maintain as a government the real impacts of federal taxes on tobacco products. Because, the federal excise duty is a fixed amount of tax that is charged at the production of each cigarette. So if these taxes are not increased over time, their effectiveness is reduced because of the inflation. So that was the first component of the measure. And the second component is an extra dollar increase that would help supporting the health conservation goals that are attached to tobacco taxation. Unfortunately, I don't have the budget with me, but there were also amounts of money that were provided as part of the federal tobacco control strategy. Federal excise duty on tobacco products, the revenues associated with those flow into the consolidated revenue funds and are used to finance all services and programs that Canadians do enjoy, including some extra fundings that were provided for for health.
One last question. One last question and it's still on the tobacco, because we had presentations here last week from people from that were talking about the issue of tobacco smuggling. And as we increase the costs of tobacco, how big is the concern that we're going to also increase now the issue of smuggling tobacco?
With the proposed adjustment, basically of $1, the other one being simply to recoup the inflation, I'd say that this is a very small increase at this point compared to the cigarette retail sale price. We have information, for instance, from Statistics Canada that shows that the average retail sale price of a cartoon of 200 cigarette was about $106 after all taxes, duties, in 2017. So the increase that is being proposed in the budget is very small, and as a result, would not be expected to put further pressures on contraband activities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on our list is Mr. Albus, and then we'll go to Mr. Fergus, and then Madam Zerowitz.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly appreciate the work that our officials do here for Canadians and for your presence and expertise here today. Just in regard to the mineral tax credit, I just want to say on the record again, we heard from the Chamber of Mines when we were in Yellowknife, where were seeking a 3-year extension for that more certainty. So I want to, certainly applaud the efforts of the member across the way, because I actually think it should be 5 years if we're going to see development of our minerals. At some point, there needs to be more certainty in that area. I obviously don't need to broach that, but I just wanted to say that that's an important policy. In regards to Veterans Affairs, following off of Mr. Julian's comments, first of all, the committee certainly would, at least this committee member would certainly be in favor of seeing more information as to the benefits and programming that is going to be discontinued, and ensuring that there is an equal or hopefully a net gain for our veterans. I think that's important, particularly when we have veterans groups coming to this committee. But I would just simply ask, when through this BIA and through the legislation that it entails, is there an automatic enrollment for those that will be losing those subsidies in favor of the new subsidy?
Yes, thank you for the question. So for the 3 new benefits, there's protections in place. Any veterans who currently, for example, are receiving the Career Impact Allowance will automatically be eligible for the additional pain and suffering compensation and will be protected at the same grade level. So if they're receiving the Career Impact Allowance grade 2, which is currently about $1,200, they would automatically move over to the 2nd grade level of the additional pain and suffering compensation. For the pain and suffering compensation, any veteran who would have received a disability award previously will automatically be considered for an additional monthly amount. So we'll go back and look at, had this benefit, this new pain and suffering compensation existed back when the individual received the disability award back to 2006, whether they would have been entitled to more, and we'll automatically start a monthly payment, recognizing the difference that they would have been entitled to. For the income replacement benefit, no veteran will receive less than what they were receiving in the Career Impact Allowance supplement, the Retirement Income Security benefit, or the earnings loss benefit, whether extended or short-term. And these are all protections that are built into the transitional provisions of the bill.
Okay, and thank you for mentioning those things. Now, is there an appeal process for someone if they are switched to a different rate that they disagree with? Is there an appeal process within it, or is it through the regular appeal process?
So there's protections for the review rights and appeal rights. So anyone who was receiving benefits prior to the coming into force of these new benefits will continue to maintain the same appeal rights. And with the new benefits, the same review rights will exist.
Will they still receive those benefits while it's under appeal?
Yes, if they were determined to be eligible and say they're questioning a grade level if it's a new applicant, a new veteran. Yes, they would continue to receive, they were determined eligible for, well, they seek a review.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to go to the TOSI rules briefly, if that's possible. Excluded businesses and excluded shares. If someone could give an example of why certain companies are excluded from the provisions of TOSI under this new Budget Implementation Act legislation?
Certain types of business, the excluded business definition is an exclusion from the tax on split income, or TOSI, that applies, and it's intended to provide a bit more of a bright line exclusion than you have in the base reasonableness test. And it applies where an individual makes significant labor contributions in support of a business. And if you make at least 20 hours per week during the portion of the year that the business is being carried on, so if a farming business, for example, only operates through a portion of the year, then that test would only have to be met through that portion of the year, not the full 52 weeks. And so that test is intended to provide an automatic exclusion from the tax on split income where you've made a significant labor contribution in support of a business. You can think of the excluded share concept as being the other side of that coin. The reasonableness test, just in general, looks to your contributions of labor and capital in support of a business. The excluded business is a bright line test for labor, and the excluded share test is a bright line test that applies in respect of capital. So if you have sufficient interest, more than 10%, in a corporation carrying on a business, and that's determined by both votes and value, then, and that business earns less than 90% of its income from the provision of services, then you can have you can be excluded from the tax on split income without having to go back and look to the reasonableness test. So it provides a much clearer, bright line test that is intended to ease compliance concerns for affected taxpayers. Now, you'd asked why some businesses are affected and not others. One of the questions we've received relates to the services business criterion, and so I could speak briefly on that if that's what you're thinking of.
So what problem are you trying to solve by outlining service businesses? Is it really because you don't want professionals using their professional corporation, setting up management companies and then charging their professional corporation a management fee and then income splitting with their spouse? Is that what this is all about?
The exclusion of professionals, again, going back to lawyers as an example where you have a lawyer operating in a law firm and a spouse or an adult child who's not participating at all in the business, such that they can't avail themselves of the labor contribution exclusion, would be kind of the paradigm test. There are actually a couple of reasons why that service criterion was put in. As I said,
broad, because to me, service business, if you're going in to a particular type of professional service, accountant, lawyer, etc. And again, I go back where they may, have certain fees paid to them to a different corporation to circumvent these. You already have rules in place to kind of pick up on that. So why put forward something that is so undefined into the Act, which could apply to many businesses that you or other people in your department may not have anticipated?
Well, as I said, the excluded share exclusion looks to capital. There is the excluded business exclusion that looks to labor contributions, and where your income from your business is almost entirely because of the labor inputs of an individual. That would be an appropriate exclusion to look to. Also, even if you don't qualify for the services test, there's still assuming you're over 25, the base reasonableness test. So as long as what you're receiving is reasonable, then the tax on split income would not apply.
Besides, what is reasonable?
Usually
a court of law is the one that determines what a reasonable person or a reasonable position would be given a certain set of context. So are you putting CRA in the position defining to people in those kinds of cases as to arbitrate that?
Reasonableness standard appears in a number of places in the Income Tax Act. You're absolutely correct that ultimately it would be the court and going up to the Supreme Court who decides questions of how statutes ought to be or are properly interpreted. This reasonableness test doesn't look to, and this is one of the refinements made from the version that was released in July, it doesn't look to an abstract reasonable level of income based upon your investment. Rather, it looks to a reasonable allocation of your income between you and your relatives vis-a-vis a business. And so you're not saying, well, okay, you invested $100 and you put in 50 hours of labor, and what's the absolute value number of what you should be able to get? Rather, it looks to the relative contributions of both the individual receiving the income and any of their relatives who are involved in the business to see if it can reasonably be considered as appropriate. So it's not, again, a specific number, more is it in a reasonable range. And lastly, it builds upon an existing reasonable allocation rule that applies currently and has for some time in the context of partnerships in subsection 103, 1.1 of the Act, where they look to whether or not an allocation of income or other amounts from partnership is reasonable, having regard to the contributions of labor and capital by each partner to the partnership. And that's something where there's longstanding Canada Revenue Agency guidance. There's been some case law on it. It's been used for quite some time, and I think people have gotten comfortable with it. And in this context, this builds on some of those same ideas. The Canada Revenue Agency has provided guidance. You're absolutely correct that if a taxpayer doesn't agree with the Canada Revenue Agency's assessing position, it can be appealed to the courts for ultimate determination.
Yeah, and I certainly appreciate that process is there. But for many Canadians, the idea of having to take something to court and going through many process, like years sometimes to get to that point, I don't think is reasonable. So, but you didn't answer the original question, which is what problem are we trying to solve in this legislation by utilizing the term service business, which is extremely broad. And I reiterate, it could apply to many businesses not imagined by your department.
The purpose of putting the service.
Purpose. I'm at what problem are you trying to solve? Can you define the problem?
Probably two problems. The first is that if you have a labor or a capital contribution test as the excluded share, test looks to, service businesses where more than 90% of your income is from the provision of services are often not very capital intensive, and so you could have a lawyer or providing legal services, and that might not take a lot of capital, and so it may well be that a nominal investment of capital by a related person would be sufficient to get more than a 10% interest in the corporation carrying on the business, just because the needs of the business, the capital needs of the business are much less than they would be for a company that's got inventory and is selling. And so that's one of the reasons is they're less capital intensive. And the other is that it represents a much more pure diversion of income. As I said, the basic idea behind the tax on split income rules is that it involves a diversion of income from a high income earner to a relatively lower income earner. And so where you have the higher income earner earning their income almost purely from the provision of their services or provision of services, then that seems to be much closer to the kind of paradigm case of income splitting. And it's not, or it's much less likely to be properly considered to be a return on equity, where all your income is really coming from services.
And I appreciate you at least trying to answer the question. Again, I ran a martial arts school for a number of years, so I definitely know what a service business is, but it's not always going to be a professional corporation, and there's not always sophisticated strategies that are used for this. A pizza shop owner versus a retail outlet, that would suddenly have it where you have two different types of businesses or several types of business where it may apply, it may not apply, or sometimes it could apply. And I think that this is without putting definition to it, I think we're headed down a road. But thank you for trying to answer my questions.
Mr. Fergus.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Puis,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Ms. Norrie in Prince Edward Island concerning our veterans. I'm very interested by the models that you developed and spoke about to my colleague, Mr. Kimmich. You said that you have a few models about what might happen to veterans when they apply for this new benefit. So you said you could speak to us a bit about that?
We developed a number of scenarios or examples, if you will, to illustrate how VAX benefits, including the Pension for Life benefits, will work together for veterans and their families. And they're to illustrate what a veteran would receive if the program started now. So, of course, by 2019, due to inflation and tax rates, it could change slightly. The examples range from a veteran with 5 years of service to a veteran with 25 years of service. So, for example, if we look at a single 25-year-old veteran who served 5 years in the Canadian Armed Forces and was injured while serving as a corporal in the infantry, and he's suffering amputations above the elbow and knee and has PTSD, so they have 100% disability, the veteran would receive total lifetime value of $1.36 million, which is non-taxable, in recognition of the service-related pain and suffering and the barrier to reestablishment. In addition, they would receive a lifetime total of $2.5 million net after taxes through the income replacement benefit. And in addition to these Pension for Life benefits, they'd also be entitled to case management services, treatment benefits, the Veterans Independence, rehabilitation, and vocational assistance. So the overall lifetime total would be close to $3.9 million in this scenario.
excellent. So fundamentally, you're really, sorry, I should have said this in French, but fundamentally you're trying to say that no one will lose out with the new Pension for Life allocation. It will always work in the veterans' favor.
That's it, exactly. The Pension for Life benefits is meant to be streamlined and simplified, consolidating the benefits for IRB and providing those with permanent and severe injuries, the financial support that they need and deserve.
Thank you very much. Ma deuxième question, ça
My second question deals with the Canada Child Benefit. I appreciated what you said, saying that there certainly some changes will be made to this to make sure that everything lines up. Now, in your opinion, will this be the last time that we'll be discussing, or rather, are you certain that this is the last time that we'll be dealing with this issue, changes to the Canada Child Benefit? Mr. LeBlanc, thank you for the question. We know that with the data sharing that is, we can confirm that is the case for that issue. We'll have finished that for the next few years. So we've made the transition. Yes, thank you. Thank you. My questions weren't too specific. It was mainly questions that I had about our veterans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to go back. I want to go back to that information again about the child benefit. Before I do, Section 45, Class 43.D, Schedule 2, you're extending the capital cost allowance by 5 years on green energy, I think. So it says, I actually went to look it up. It says generate renewable energy or conserve energy in order to encourage investment in these properties. What would this include in the conserve energy class? I'm just wondering, what would this be?
So there are certain types of equipment that would make efficient use of energy and in conserving energy in terms of of heat that would be generated out of a system could be then reused for certain useful purposes. I'm not myself an engineer, but it's in terms of how the equipment can reuse either the energy or heat efficiently.
But this is a class of property that's getting a preferential tax treatment, kind of the way mineral exploration does, but only for 3 years. I'm just wondering what that is on the conservation energy side. Like it says, or conserve energy. I understand generating renewable energy. I think we all do. I'm just wondering what that conserve energy is that this provision applies to, because it says till 2025.
As I understand conservation and building upon Mode's answer, it might include an energy generation facility that retains useful heat and uses it in an adjoining, say, greenhouse instead of just producing waste heat. And so excess energy is conserved and utilized to a productive end.
If the facility is retaining it then. Like if the facility has a means to try to retain that capture that energy, so some type of cogeneration or a facility where a byproduct is heat generated and captured in some way. Okay, so that would then be, so you're covering everything possible. You both the generation and some type of conservation. How many of these facilities are there across Canada? Like how much is the potential there?
In terms of qualification, there's a number of technical guidelines and technical requirements that need to be met. The specifications are put out by NRCan, Natural Resources Canada. And so it's not just a general set of rules. There are some very specific conditions that need to be made in order for it to be a qualifying cogeneration, high efficiency cogeneration facility.
So I guess now I'll go back now to the child benefit data, because I got, Mr. LeBlanc, you explained to me kind of what it would be, the content, so that makes sense to me. But I'm still struggling with what you said, Mr. McGowan, 2016, and the changes over, and you call it some vestigial information. I want to understand what consolidation of all the programs did between 2016 to 2018, that the provisions here in this part are trying to change. What is that information that was provided that isn't now, or the formatting change of it? Like I'm still not understanding what this information is.
Pierre can discuss the classes of information, and thanks for giving him an opportunity to clarify my earlier comments if they weren't adequately clear. Prior to the introduction of the Canada Child Benefit, a number of provinces referenced the National Canada Child Benefit Supplement in providing their social services, as Pierre discussed. With the introduction of the Canada Child Benefit, that replaced the old NCBS, but a number of the provinces still referenced the NCBS, which is a variable in the computation of the old child benefit regime, and so that variable, I think it might have been C, was retained.
Before you continue, sir, just so I understand now. So then, is this part of the change to help some provinces where the administration of the child benefit and some of the administration of provincial programs was being done by the federal government? Is that part of it, or is it not?
It has more to do with provinces who, say, require the amount determined for C in section 122.61 of the Income Tax Act. If they refer to needing that information specifically, then with the change in the rules, that C wouldn't have been there anymore. So it was kept on the books for a couple of years to give provinces an opportunity to transition for their information requirements to the new Canada Child Benefit System.
Thank you.
Madam Zarowitz.
Mr. Chair, and thanks to everyone today for being here, for all your work, and for your patience with all our questions. The first thing I wanted to talk about is the Canada Worker Benefit. My riding of Davenport is downtown West Toronto. It sounds like it's a rich and wealthy place, but it's not. I have a lot of working class residents, and so often our Liberal government talks about putting in place a lot of measures that will help support the middle class and those working hard to join it. And I would say a good chunk of my residents are working hard to join the middle class. So I'm delighted that with the introduction of the Canada Worker Benefit. And so I would love if you could just, for my own purpose, just talk to me or just clarify with me or make sure I'm very clear on how will the new Canadian Worker Benefit or Canada Worker Benefit benefit advantage low income workers?
Okay, thank you for your question. So when the Canada Workers Benefit, so building on the current working income tax benefit, is introduced in 2019, you can think of two main enrichments or improvements. So one is the generosity of the benefit. So when it'll become more generous in a couple of ways. First, the maximum benefit will be increased. So it'll be increased by about $170 for both unattached singles and for families. That's both single parents and couples.
70 a month, a week, a year?
That's a year.
Okay.
These are annual amounts.
Okay.
Now, the thing is that also, so it's the Canada Workers Benefit is, just to use the new name, is so it phases in with earnings, and then it's flat for a while, and then it phases out with your net income. So we're going to the proposal is to start phasing it out a little later, so people can earn a bit more income before it starts to phase out, and then phasing it out at a more gradual rate. So at 12% instead of the current, right now under the Whitby, it's 15%. So that'll mean that I talked about the maximum increase in the maximum benefit of $170, but the increase can be significantly more than $170 for several types because they're benefiting from the two elements, both from the increase in the maximum benefit, but also because it's phasing out more gradually as the income increases. So an example given in the budget for a single worker, someone earning around $15,000, it'd be about a $500 increase from the proposal included in budget 2018. So there's that enrichment. The second is that we know, and we've in 2016 we published in our tax expenditure report. We know that everyone who's eligible currently for the working income tax benefit isn't claiming it. We estimated a take-up rate of about 85%. So that means that some low-income workers who are filing a tax return aren't. You currently have to fill out Schedule 6. So basically, the changes that's being proposed, it'll be in the second budget implementation bill, but just to briefly set the stage, is that if someone doesn't claim it, the CRA will calculate it for them and pay it out.
Do we know how many people that'll we expect that to help? That 15%?
That's about 300,000.
300,000 people.
Eligible
Wow.
low-income workers.
Wow, that's wonderful. And how is it that this new tax credit is going to encourage more people to enter the workforce?
Well, just the idea that it's supplementing, it requires. So we talked about it being phased in. It's phased in with earnings, so that can be employment income, that can be self-employment income. Just the idea is to support low-income workers in a way, low-income families, in a way that's connected to work. So that requires you to work, to have a job. So I mean that's the encouragement, and also as I mentioned, phasing it out more gradually means for people who are in the income range where it's being phased out, they'll lose a little less of their benefit as their income goes up.
Great, thank you. My next question is with respect to the small business tax rate and its reduction. I held a bit of a roundtable discussion with small businesses in my riding, and when I spoke to them about the reduction from 11% to 9%, they were unequivocal, very, very happy about it. I wonder if you could maybe talk to me about what would be the impact of the reduced small business tax rate on eligible Canadian businesses' productivity and investments.
Well, the objective of the small business deduction is to leave more after-tax income within businesses, and so that more money is available for businesses to reinvest in their business. Overall, there's about 750,000 businesses each year claiming the small business deduction.
Okay, Great, thank you. And then I guess my last question, if I may, is just around the expansion of the medical expense tax credit for service animal expenses. I'm a bit of a chronic insomniac, and so lately I've been listening to podcasts, and so I've been listening to podcasts about, believe it or not, trauma and PTSD. And so one of my questions is, how do service dogs help individuals who suffer from PTSD?
Okay, thank you for the question. So, so Trevor talked about the expansion, so that psychiatric service dogs will be included as an eligible defense expense. Sorry. If you think of psychiatric service dogs in general, they can be tasked like if someone has severe anxiety, searching their home before they enter. If someone's experiencing night terrors, applying compression, I mean, just to help improve the situation. For someone with post-traumatic stress disorder, it could be even licking, if they're having a dissociative episode, to lick their hand to try to take them out of it. I'm trying to think of another example. If someone has, maybe if partly related to that post-traumatic stress disorder is some sort of agoraphobia, not wanting to leave your home, sort of, you know, the animal, the dog, can be trained to try to coax the owner, the person dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder to get out and to engage more, or to leave their home. So those would be some examples of the tasks that would be in mind.
And just so that I'm clear, how will this tax credit help cover the cost of a service dog?
Okay, well, it's the medical expense tax credit it's a non-refundable credit. So it's basically, it's a portion of, it's for above average medical expenses. So it's the portion of eligible expenses that are above 3% of your net income for most people. So basically it'll be 15% of whatever those eligible expenses could be. So it could be obtaining the animal. It could be the upkeep of the animal. I mean, food and things like that. It can vet bills. It could be things like if you required to travel to undergo special training to learn how to best use the animal to help you. That would be another type of eligible expense.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I have a few questions. On the workers' benefit, does it start to phase out before someone becomes taxable? In other words, we all have the personal exemption. Many of us have additional credits that raise the level of income we earn before any tax rate begins to apply. Does the workers' benefit start to phase out before that point or after it?
You know, it's around, I'm thinking of an unattached individual because it's going to phase out around, just like make me look at the right graph, around $13,000. So that's roughly around the same level because you have
as the personal exemption.
Yeah, well, the basic personal exemption, that's in 2017 was $11,635. That person will be able to claim the Canada Employment Credit, so about $1150 roughly. Their CPP contributions, their EI premiums. So probably they're not quite taxed. It's pretty close.
Right. So,
for a single parent, it would probably be a bit. I think they would still be non-taxable.
When it starts to be phased out.
Yeah. It'll depend on the type. So a single parent would be able to claim the eligible dependent credit. So eventually they'd have two basic personal amounts. So
for someone who does have two basic personal amounts, does it start to phase out before they become taxable, or?
Yes, it does.
It does.
Yeah.
And does that phase out then contribute to the marginal effective tax rate of the individual in the pre-tax share of their income?
Yeah, it does. So basically, what the if you think of it, when it's phasing in, it's reducing the marginal tax rate, and then when it's phasing out, it's increasing the marginal tax rate. And that's when we design these programs and when we enrich these programs. That's something we're always mindful of, and that's one of the motivations for reducing the phase-out rate to 12%.
But now, as I understand it, the earned income tax credit in the United States phases out at higher income levels, and therefore has the effect of actually reducing the tax owed by the working person rather than just giving them an increase in take-home pay before they reach a taxable level. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting issues in comparing the earned income tax credit in the U.S. and the now working income tax benefit to become the Canada Workers Benefit is if you think of the delivery of child benefits in the U.S., a lot of it is done through the earned income tax credit. I mean, the earned income tax credit is much, much more generous for families with children than it is for unattached individuals, whereas we have all our child benefit system. So that's it's a bit of a blend. Certainly, it's in the U.S. it's considered an important instrument for encouraging work, for supporting low-income families, but it does have that child or families with children element. So it's an interesting issue to think about when comparing the two.
But if the phase out were to start later than in any jurisdiction, could it effectively reduce one's tax burden rather than being just a refundable benefit?
It depends. I mean, it depends. You can think of it two ways. You can think of their total liability during the year. So you can think of, okay, during the year, I might, if I'm in one of those cases where I start to pay tax, I might owe, this amount of tax. I receive this amount of what will be the Canada Workers Benefit. And so it might be a net positive or a net negative. What we see in a lot of cases, it ends up being a refund at the end of the year because to the extent those individuals are paying some amount of tax, it's being withheld. Most of them have employment income, so it's withheld at source. So it ends up being, to a significant extent, something they receive back at tax time because they've already.
I'm not so much interested in when they get it. I'm not so much interested in when they get it, but whether it's reducing whether it's reducing their tax burden.
Yeah.
In some cases, versus providing a direct benefit. Do you understand the distinction I'm drawing? Because sure. in the former, you're reducing the amount that the taxpayer would otherwise owe the government. In the latter, the government owes you something. And there is an intersection point where one goes from workers' benefit eligibility to tax-paying employee. And at that intersection point, I'm trying to ascertain whether this transforms into a tax reduction at the higher end.
No, it's an interesting way to think about it. I mean, I guess you can think of, there's basically two things. I mean, what we've just been talking about is more of an average tax rate. So in net, are you paying something or are you receiving something? And then it's a question, I mean, as a couple of questions ago of what's your tax rate on the margin? So like on an issue, when I'm in a given range for an additional $100,000 of earnings, what am I paying on that? To either to increases in taxes or reductions in income-tested benefits.
And instances where the person is both eligible for the workers' benefit and has exhausted all personal exemptions, does the phase-out rate compound the tax rate, or does it subtract from the taxes owing?
It's going to depend on the situation, but you can think of situations where it'll be, take $1,000 more earnings that they'll owe. So, and let's take your assumption that they've exhausted. They're taxable, so their income is above the sum of their non-refundable credits. Then they are going to, they'll pay more tax. I mean, starting at a pretty low rate, say in Ontario, 15% federal and just above 5% provincial. And if they're in the phase-out rate for the proposed Canada Workers Benefit, then there'll be a 12% reduction in their entitlement.
Does that raise their meter? I guess is what I'm really getting at here. Does that raise?
It can.
If I could finish.
It can.
If I can finish, does it raise their meter to 27%, or does it just basically have the effect for that person of expanding the personal exemption?
No, it can raise their effective marginal tax rate. And I think in designing an income-tested benefit like this, especially something targeted at low-income workers, the idea is, I mean, there are trade-offs, and you're trying to achieve the right balance. And there's the idea that research shows that individuals are particularly sensitive to incentives when, I mean, we think that incentives matter in lots of cases, but certainly when it's a question, when it's a discrete decision, you know, do I work or not work? So, and there, you know, there it can matter a lot. And there, enriching the Canada Workers Benefit just means work pays a bit more. But there's another decision that's important. Given that I'm working, do I work a bit more? And there, you have to, in designing this, you take into account that as either it's going to be a lower phase-out rate over a slightly longer range. So yeah, those are the trade-off. We think we're still in a spot where it's a net plus. So I mean, we're quite confident of that. So, but it's something. It's certainly something to be mindful of when designing such a benefit.
I would think so, because the purpose of Whitby originally, and as I understand the earned income tax credit south of the border, was not so much a redistributional purpose as it was a work incentive to help people get over the welfare wall, ensure that wage increases and increased hours always pay more. And the phase out of some of these benefits have the opposite effect at certain income levels, as you've confirmed. On the same subject of marginal effective tax rates, under the changes to Canadian-controlled private corporations, when someone's passive income goes when a company's passive income goes from $50,000 to $50,001, what will be the marginal effective tax rate on that additional dollar of passive income?
So under the proposed measure, for each additional dollar that you earn above $50,000 of passive income, the eligibility for the small business deduction will be reduced on $5 of active income. And so on those $5 of active income, the tax rate at the federal level in 2009 is proposed to be 9%. And so on those $5 of income, the rate will be increased to 15%. And so on those, under the proposed measure, the investment income is not taxed. It's taxed under the current rules.
Presuming there's active income. No, my question was presuming there is passive income and active income, passive and active.
So it would
what is
increase
what is the total marginal effective tax rate on moving from $50,000 in passive income to $50,001?
So the tax rate that applies on investment income is around 50% right now at the corporation. That is not going to change.
We'll stay at that? Yes.
So in terms of additional, there's no change. So it'll be around 50%.
Okay, great. We've covered the first part of it. So then you're then on the other side of the active account, you're then reducing the company's eligibility for the small business tax deduction, right?
Yes.
Okay. So then when you reduce by $5 the amount of money that the small business can use for the small business tax deduction, how much extra tax will they pay on that $5?
So the tax rate will go from 9 to 15%, so 6% additional on those $5. And so 30 cents, sir.
30 cents. So now we're 30 cents plus 50 cents, so we're 80%. No. Yes. No. Sorry, you don't have the floor. I didn't interrupt you when you had the floor. If I were you, I wouldn't want this talked about either, so I can appreciate why you don't want me to go here, but I'm going to go here. The effect of, if you take a business that has passive and active income, for which only one thing has changed, and that is that business will go from $50,000 to $50,001. That $1 will be taxed at a rate of 50.17%. And then, on top of that, the effect of earning that dollar will reduce the eligibility for the small business tax rate by $5. You multiply 5 times 6, you've got 30. So the effect is 30 on top of 50.
There's no, just to make sure that we understand each other. So the 50 is the overall tax that applies on investment income. That's not changing.
That's not changing.
On the $5, 50% of the $5 will be taxable. So if you will tax at the general rate, so that's 15%, and so that will be the overall tax will be, if I'm calculating this correctly, 75 cents. But the change is 30 cents.
The change is 30 cents.
Yes.
The change. So what was it before? What would it have been, the rate have been before?
9%. So it goes from
No,
9.
the change is 50 is 30 cents on that dollar.
On the $5 of active income, the change is 30 cents, and there's no change on the 50. So I don't think you can add the 50 to the 30 directly.
No, but actually, that's the rate that someone would effectively pay on that extra dollar of passive income.
But to pay those additional taxes, you need $6 additional of income. And so I don't think you can just add on $1 the taxes that you would pay on $5 of active income. You would need overall to have earned $6 in order to pay those additional taxes.
Right. Okay. I guess what I'm saying is the change in the taxability of that new dollar of passive income is already 50%. We all agree to that. But with the proposal in the budget, the act of earning that extra dollar of passive income would subject another $5 to a higher tax rate. That's correct. So you would pay effectively by earning that extra dollar, would you not first lose 50 cents?
As is currently the case.
Yes, and will continue to be the case.
Yes.
And then you would, if nothing else changes in your situation, lose another 30 cents.
That's correct. That's
right. And then 30 plus 50 is 80. Yes, I understand that a member across the way does not agree that 30 plus 50 is 80. So maybe we went to different math classes in high school or in elementary school. But the reality is that is the marginal. Now, the next question I have is, will this affect someone's access to lower provincial tax rates for small businesses?
That's a decision to be made by provincial governments.
Okay. So, but assuming that it doesn't have any change there at a provincial level, we're already at an 80% marginal tax rate on a dollar of passive income over 50. Thank you for confirming that. And we had the parliamentary budget officer here. He indicated that the deficit for this fiscal year, which of course is a budgetary matter, and we are discussing the budget bill, will be $22 billion, not the $18 billion that your budget, that the government's budget has projected. Can you explain can anyone on the panel today explain the difference?
No, I'm sorry. I think we're here to explain the technical tax changes in parts 1 and 2 and others of the bill. I think that falls outside of the area of our expertise. And
excellent. All right, we'll turn the floor over to Mr. Albus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly appreciate that last round. I thought there was very interesting round. So in regards to, the point was mentioned by Mr. McGowan quite early in my last intervention, that he had made the mention of the minister's failed consultation process in regards to the small business tax changes, or CCPCs. And one of the key goals, or at least the problem that was outlined in that document, was that incorporated companies there was more and more incorporated companies. Now, my understanding is the Government of Canada has never received so much corporate income tax but there are more entities. Is that correct? And that was one of the things, is that they said, we see this as a growing concern that we have more and more incorporations. That was kind of the rationale for the whole tax fairness argument that they made.
There is certainly an increase in the use of CCPCs that has been observed in the data, very strong growth in recent years.
Okay.
I think.
Do you remember any of the data, just so we can share with the people at home?
It was, it was in the fall update, I believe, but we can definitely provide information to the committee.
Okay. So again, it was cited as one of the concerns that there was more and more incorporations. So that the minister has basically surrendered most of the suggestions in that, everything from intergenerational transfers to some extent, and I just want to point out that the chair asked a lot of good questions about the cost of the passive income, so I have a lot of concerns in those areas. But by lowering the rate, the small business tax rate that Ms. Derowitz was regarding, will we not be encouraging, through implementation of this, increased incorporations?
I think there's a lot of reasons why CCPCs or entrepreneurs would choose to incorporate. And the preferential tax system that applies to corporation is aimed at supporting firms to reinvest in their business and in supporting them in raising equity and all this.
I've spoken to a number of entrepreneurs in Canada, and one of the things I've heard from many of them is that they believe that if you have rates like 50,000 on passive investments before you suddenly pay the much larger tax rate on that $50,001 up, is that they may end up simply incorporating further companies and seeing those profits go there. For example, many successful franchise companies, you have an entrepreneur that will have the trademark, the intellectual property, in a company, and that then they will lease out that intellectual property and return passive investment. So again, by incorporating some of these actions, do you not foresee that there could be a further stimulus to increased incorporation, particularly for those that deal in intangible items and passive investments? Has there been any modeling that you've done?
Is your question that the reduction in the small business rate will encourage incorporation, or I wasn't sure
There's
about
multiple factors here. Again, a smaller tax rate, coupled with the fact that now, if someone says, I'm going to take certain trademarks, certain intellectual properties, and if I hit that threshold of 50,001, then I can simply spin off part of those intellectual properties to another company and begin to do that. So are we not creating a situation where we're encouraging what the government originally intended to see it in as a problem?
So the $50,000 will have to be shared amongst associated corporations, and it's based on rules that already exist for the small business deduction. And so if in your example, the entrepreneur would own the other company and just split up its operation, so to benefit for more of the $50,000, that wouldn't work under the rules that are being proposed.
So again, that could there be some strategies between shareholders where they bring other people in to share that income so that they pay that lower rate?
I just building on Maud's comment as well. Well, first of all, I don't know that one of the goals was to prevent the proliferation of corporations so much as to ensure that when corporations are used, the appropriate tax results occur. But then you'd mentioned as well the use of an asset that if in one corporation would be actively used in the business, transferred to another corporation and then used by corporations within a related group in their businesses. And one of the key exclusions for this small business deduction, eligibility reduction, is that active assets are excluded from that, or income from active assets, which could include an asset that's used by a related company in its business. So, and then as Maud had said as well, these are supplementary on the existing small business deduction grind that occurs in respect of taxable capital employed in Canada, and those do apply in respect of an associated group of corporations. So just incorporating more companies isn't going to get you out of the rules. I can't say there's no planning out there to try to avoid the rules. There certainly is an incentive to do so, but in general terms, it applies based on a group
Has there been any
concept.
modeling done just to see if we're not pushing that?
Go to Mr. Fergus.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I guess my question is actually going to be just a little bit, it's gonna be pretty short, Monsieur Leblanc, regarding the worker benefit. If I understand it correctly, the idea was, of course, is that to have this amount, to have, like you said, a longer phase out, and to start to phase out later. The purpose is, of course, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that when you want to have, when you have people of same income, one receiving benefits, the other one working, the people who are working at a certain level, the working poor, have some disadvantages, and it would be rational for them, rather than to seek work, to seek social benefits, just because of the way that our taxes and the benefit systems, all ancillary things, work in the whole process. It doesn't work in their favor. So the idea of having the benefit, or the working income benefit, is that you're allowing them to make the rational choice to choose work. Of course, work has many advantages, possibility of gaining greater income. It's an ennobling activity. It could lead to future growth and future opportunities. Do I have that right?
That's right. I think that's a fair observation. I mean, another way to think about it, as during the previous round of questions on the issue, there are sort of different decisions in relation to work. And I think what a lot of research has shown is that a key decision is just whether to be in the workforce or not. So the sort of measure we think of, sometimes it's called the participation tax rate. And basically that's the effective tax rate comparing two states of the world. One, I don't work, and two, I work, let's say I work 1,500 hours a year at minimum wage. And, considering, okay, what, just as the way you've set it up, just how much of those earnings am I going to keep? And there, a key question is even though it'll be phased out over, even though the Canada Workers Benefit as proposed would be phased out over a longer range, it still could be the question between someone getting some Canada Workers Benefit and nothing under the current system. So as they think about that decision, as they make those calculations, and especially as they learn over time, sort of, they work another year and learn how the system works, they'll think, okay, well, now that I'm working this many hours, say minimum wage, like I'm getting something from this benefit. So, and that'll, we think play, some part in their calculations when they make these decisions.
Right. And there's also the added incentive, or the added innovation, which I believe you also testified to today, is that now Revenue Canada or Revenue Agency rather, will make that calculation automatically for workers. They don't actually have to go out and fill out, I think it was Section 6, to be able to do that. So just so it makes it a lot more easier for them to see the benefit.
That's right. So and just to confirm, that element of the proposal it's not in this, so we can expect it in the next Budget Implementation Act, I think would be fair to say. We still like, in a lot of cases, people to fill out Schedule 6. It could just mean they'll get the money sooner rather than later. So, but in those cases where they don't, right now under the current system, they're not receiving anything, and the proposal is for them to receive the benefit which they've earned. So for CRA to do the calculations for them.
Thank you for that. That leads me just to one last question, if I could. I think that's an important innovation for CRA to make that calculation. As that will come out in the second Budget Implementation Act in the fall. It reminds me of the importance of perhaps other basic benefits that Canadians can profit from, that perhaps we should, or CRA should start taking on a little bit more of that active, let's help people along so that we don't lose ourselves or have that lose that opportunity to take full advantage of all the benefits to which they're eligible to receive.
I think that's an important point, and I'll just touch on them briefly because others are better placed to discuss them than I, but there are important initiatives in Budget 2018 to provide more people to support with tax filing, which is often an important gateway to receiving benefits. So more funding for the Community Volunteer Income Tax Program, where that's basically organizing volunteers across the country.
Huge success in my riding this year.
You have more targeted funding, in particular to go on reserves. So to reach out to Indigenous communities, to encourage them both to file, but also to make sure their children are registered for the Canada Child Benefit. So that's maybe I'll just leave it there, but that work is important too.
Super. Yeah. Understood. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the BIA legislation, what will the small business tax rate be effective January 1st, 2019?
9%.
And currently today it is?
Today, under the proposed legislation, it is 10. It was 10.5 last year.
No, and thank you. So it's about up to that $500,000 mark by January 1st, 2019. I understand it's about $7,500 of savings, of tax savings for small businesses. How does our small business tax rate compare internationally?
The small business tax rate compares very well. We're among the lowest in the G7. We are the lowest, and among the lowest in the OECD.
Okay. And with the legislation contained in the BIA Part 1 here, with regards to passive investments, is there any change, or is there a change on the tax rate with regards to passive investments?
No.
That's no? That's correct. Thank you very much on that one. With regards to businesses that have set aside, and in my estimation, an entrepreneur or professional would, using just a normal rate of return to say 5%, to get to that $50,000 mark, would have to accumulate a few $1 million, if I'm not mistaken, or over $1 million of passive investments to achieve, say, $50,000 in passive income, to then be brought up from the small business tax rate of 9% to the general corporate tax rate of about 15% on their active income.
So if you are assuming that the rate of return is 5%, then $50,000 would be consistent with $1 million of passive assets before the new measure starts to gradually reduce the small business deduction, and it would be fully phased out at $3 million.
Exactly. So someone that would have approximately $3 million in passive investments would be asked to pay the general corporate tax rate of 15% on their active income versus 9% on their small business tax rate. That's correct. And that would affect approximately 3% of 1.8 million or 1.6 million of CCPCs that exist in Canada.
That's correct.
So the Conservatives are worrying about the richest of the richest, the wealthiest of the wealthiest, those 3%. Well, and I'm going to make a political statement, we are worrying for all Canadians and ensuring that all Canadians benefit from low tax rates, and also ensure that corporations can continue to invest, and most corporations are actually at the general tax rate. So anybody out there, if you want to think of entities in my riding, and so forth. And I did meet this morning with the Canadian Franchise Association, and they're very happy that we're cutting the small business tax rate from 10.5 or 10 to 9%, and a number of the measures we put in place, including skills training and so forth. One of the elements that you brought about, and my colleague, Mr. Hurwitz, say that right, mentioned, was the automatic enrollment for the CWB. Will that happen in this BIA one? Is that contained in this BIA? Is BIA 2?
Coming soon.
Coming soon. That's right. Okay. I just wanted to make that clarification. With regards to the indexation of the CCB, That'll be this year?
Right, so that is in this,
BIY one.
the bill that's before you, and that's right. So basically, child benefits, like some other income benefits, work on a July to June schedule.
Yes.
So in July 2018, it'll be based on your 2017 income, and both the maximum benefits and the income thresholds will be indexed at 1.5%, which is the indexation that applies to the 2018 tax year.
Yeah, and my understanding is over a 2 or 3 year fiscal period for the province of Ontario, it's roughly another over $2 billion that will flow to many families here in Ontario, including the ones in my riding of Vaughan Woodbridge, if I remember the numbers correctly.
It's over the fiscal planning period, it's 5.6 billion nationally, so that seems consistent.
I'll stop there, Chair. We have a vote.
The floor goes to Mr. Julian. We have 25 minutes until the vote. I propose we allow Mr. Julian to make his intervention.
I second that, Mr. Chair.
We have a seconder.
Yeah. Ms. Norrie, I'd like to come back to your scenario that you laid out for us, a 25-year-old, 5 years of service as a veteran, and the 3.9 million over. So I have two questions coming out of that. What is the actuarial table? So we're talking about that amount of money over what period of time? And secondly, how would that compare to that same case with the benefits that exist prior to the BIE being introduced? And if you don't have an answer right off the bat, if you could provide it in writing, that would be wonderful.
Sure, I can follow up with some of that information. I would just indicate is to your first part of your question, the 3.9 million would be over the lifetime of the veteran's expected life. So that's part of what's been designed into these pension for life benefits is that currently before the BIA, we would have, for example, a disability award that's paid in a lump sum. So these payments would be monthly for life.
I understand, but
yeah.
for the actuarial table, what would the estimate be over the lifetime?
Unfortunately, I don't have that information with me, but I'd be happy to provide it.
Be wonderful. Thank you very much. And to give us as well the existing structure of benefits to that same veteran, that would be helpful as well. And
Sure.
if you don't mind, I'll move to another subject, which is around the CPP. And this question is probably to Mr. McGowan. We had in C26 no provision for dropout provisions in the expanded CPP, as you're aware. So I'm wondering if there were Department of Finance estimates or models around what the dropout provisions, what the cost would have been for dropout provisions had they been included in C26.
It's actually others in the Department of Finance who look after the Canada Pension Plan who would be able to respond to your question. So we can bring them back to them, or we can see if they'll at what point if they'll be here on this bill. So.
Okay, thank you. And so further to that then, we have the drop-in provisions. And so I'd like the same models around the drop-in provisions. What I would like to do is be able to compare what would have happened, the benefits that would have accrued to people under CPP with dropout provisions that were not only for base CPP but also for the additional CPP, the expanded CPP, and then compare that to the drop-in provisions that have been applied in the BIA. So that gives us, as with the veterans, that gives us a good sense, clearing away the fog that sometimes exists in politics, to actually see whether there is a net benefit to people as a result of that, particularly with people with disabilities. That's a keen interest of a number of us around the table. So is that something that we could entrust to you to pass on to your colleagues at Finance to come back in fairly short order to committee? Because, of course, we'll be hearing from witnesses starting in the next day or two.
We'll have to make the answer very quick, and that will have to be the last question.
No, my understanding is that on other parts of the bill, that that our colleagues will be, you'll be able to ask them that question directly.
Okay, I have one brief question
Go
for
ahead.
follow-up as well, and that is income sprinkling and spouses, and whether there are department models analysis over the inclusion of possibility of spouses and income sprinkling for businesses, and whether there are estimates on the cost on that. That would be the other question I had for today. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. I thank the witnesses for being with us today. They will return tomorrow to discuss Part 3, 5, and 6. And unless there's any other business, that will adjourn today's meeting, and we will proceed to voting. Thank you.